Hey, in this video, I'm going to break down the 5 steps you need to take to unlock your entrepreneurial creativity as a coach. This is so important. This is so important. Let's dive into creativity. So yesterday, we talked about the importance of creativity, the value of creativity. I think we need to understand creativity in a different way than I think most of us are programmed to understand creativity. I think there's a dichotomous program out there, meaning it's an either or program. And I think for the most part, we're taught that you are either creative or successful, right? Like there are celebrities, obviously, that become superstars and mega rich and so forth. But for the most part, we've got that phrase called the struggling artist. And I think most parents, unless they're also creators or they value creativity, I think most parents, most society programming, most institutions don't really value creativity as a way to be successful. So we're constantly programmed out of our creativity, yet we are creators and we do have innate creativity inside of us. It's just that we've been programmed out of it. And so this process is really about unlearning and unprogramming. And I want to make a distinction about creativity, which is an act, and creator, which is an identity. Both of those are important. They're just different. We're not going to dive into them in this class right now, but just understanding the difference there. And that if you have an identity block, like you don't see yourself as a creator, it doesn't matter what rules you learn, your identity block is going to sabotage that completely. Another dichotomous programming that we talked about, this is really more of a choice than programming, is, speaking of identity, is the difference between a chaser and a creator. So we've got the creator inside of creativity, but then you've got creator and chaser inside of the employee mind. The linear intellectual world is really about chasing. And if you are a chaser, then what you're looking for is for people to tell you what to do so that you can avoid being right or being wrong. Basically, you're chasing the right information. And there are areas in personal development and even some coaching where, like in the coaching industry, where that's relevant and that's important. But those areas are actually pretty small. Instead of being a chaser, well, if you are a chaser, and you constantly are looking for the right thing to do externally, somebody else tell you what that is, then you have no freedom. Like I want that to really land, because if you need external validation, you cannot be free. The only thing that can create is restriction. You're going to always need something or someone to tell you what to do. Now, again, at a big chunked up level, there's value in that. But the majority of the entrepreneurial journey must be intrinsic. It must be more about creating. We made a distinction in one of the earlier classes about laws, not rules. You got to understand the laws of creativity, the laws of entrepreneurship, the laws of coaching, of rapport, of sales, marketing. Why do people follow? What causes people to learn? What causes people to just scroll on by? What causes things to go viral? You need to understand the laws if you want any kind of freedom in your life. If all you chase are the rules, then really what you're chasing is restriction. Rules equal restriction. Laws equal liberation. Put that on a t-shirt. Now, one of the things that makes this challenging is that our intellect wants to be safe, and that's why we want the rules. So we're going to be in constant conflict between our intellect's desire for safety and never being wrong, because our intellect thinks being wrong is unsafe, it's dangerous, and our desire to create. And creativity and safety really, they don't go together. The intellect doesn't value creativity.
Right.
But creativity is really the only place that you're going to find happiness or joy or meaning. So again, another constant conflict. And as so often in so many areas of personal development, your challenge is not going to be knowing what path there exists, like knowing that there's a path over here, there's a path over here, knowing the information on each of those paths. Your constant challenge is going to be staying in the relationship with the conflict, staying in the relationship with your fears, staying in the relationship with your resistance, staying in the relationship with the required bumps in the road. That's the majority of where your journey is going to be won or lost. It's not going to be won or lost with your intellect or your determination or your discipline or your motivation. None of those things has the power to really change your relationship to what's required. I'll stop there. Michelle, you can add in whatever you got at this point.
I love what you just said. It's the knowing that the internal conflict is part of the process. Because for most of us, right, we feel that conflict and we believe that that means that there's something wrong. And what I want everybody that's listening to really get from what you were just saying, Sean, is that that is the process. There is going to be that conflict. There is going to be that internal back and forth. And so if we're understanding that that's happening, then it'll allow us to move through it and be in relationship with it without thinking that there's something wrong with us for experiencing it, and then have us shift our focus away from being in that creative conflict to trying to resolve the conflict, which in turn will squash our creativity.
Bingo. Your dogs agree, or at least one of them does.
That's Olive. Like, yes, yes.
Olive agrees. So this idea of creativity versus safety. We were all taught at some point in time, explicitly or implicitly, that authentic creation and expression is punishable by disapproval.
Yeah.
And so then that's when we start to suppress it.
Yeah.
And then the creativity itself is what we fear. We don't really fear the creativity. We fear the punishment of the creativity. But because those two things are now associated, the way the human brain works is we actually start to have resistance to the creativity. Yeah. And I'll break this down here in a few moments that I think are really important for you to see the separation in how we do this, because we need to know how we're doing it in order to change it, right? Let me take a step back and say, if you are a transformational coach or you want to be a transformational coach, being a creator is not a negotiable thing. Because if you don't create, then all you can do is sell commodities. And there's no commodity that's going to produce transformation. So if you want to be a transformational coach, everything that we're talking about is required. If you don't want to be a transformational coach and you want to sell commodities, you just want to sell information, all of that is great. This is not necessarily required. But it is required if you want to fundamentally and foundational change people's lives. So don't try to find a way around this. There is no detour around the process of transformation. So if that's you, here's the belief that we're going to invite you into. And it's actually a knowingness that you have, but it's just been covered up, if you're like most people, by the program beliefs that we have. The belief that we're inviting you into is that your authentic creativity has financial viability. It has validation. First of all, it's valid, first of all. But then on top of that, it has financial viability potential. What that means is every single one of you who's been on this human journey and learned lessons, you have lessons that you could teach that people will pay for. You have to have that belief, because if you don't think that's possible, that people will pay for your lessons to transform their lives, then none of this matters. But you have to have that belief and then understand how that belief has been attacked, really. How we've been programmed into doubting that. So your authentic creation has financial viability. Whether you unlock that or not, that's your choice. And I want to be really, really clear on this. This is like a fork in the road moment. You have financial viability. We've been talking a lot about alignment. You have a recipe with alignment that can unlock that financial viability. And that's a choice. There's none of you that doesn't have that ability. But most people will choose not to. Why? Because it's uncomfortable. I mean, it really, truly is just that simple. It's uncomfortable. The intensity of the discomfort can change, but most people are not willing to go through discomfort in order to live the life of their dreams. Most people are not willing to go through discomfort in order to unlock their freedom. And until you are willing to go through the discomfort, no information matters. Because all you're going to do is just keep constipating yourself with more rules. And rules will never unlock your creativity. So for transformational coaches, what was clear to me this morning as I was thinking about this class is there's really two stages. I mean, there's a lot of stuff inside these stages, but in the context of this conversation, there's two stages. Your creativity, which is required for transformation, must be unlocked. And then on top of that, you've got to create entrepreneurial viability, meaning that's the money piece. That's the business side of it. But you can't create a transformational business if your creativity is not unlocked. If your creativity is hidden, you can't transform with it because it's got to be unlocked. But just unlocking your creativity doesn't mean you'll create a business around it. So unlocking your creativity and learning the entrepreneurial journey are actually separate. They work with each other and feed into each other with transformational coaching, but these are separate. One of the reasons that so many people really struggle is they just focus on the rules of building a business, never understand the laws, and never unlock their creativity. Lights out, game over. It's impossible, you guys. But we need to understand that these are actually distinct. One of the things that's really important to understand is that this is a process of unlocking it. And this needs to be worked on by itself. And then this needs to be worked on by itself. And then they come together and they're worked on together. Yes. Most people are only doing one of them without unlocking creativity. And I say this with love and advocacy. You just can't, it cannot work that way. So we're going to dive into how we're going to unlock this creativity. But before that, Michelle and Olive, got anything you want to add?
Don't invite her in. Don't invite her in. I again, because there's so much we could talk about here. I just want to reinforce what you just said. The parts have to be addressed separately and then they can be brought together. And if you really want to do this work, if you really want to build this business that you are worthy of and that you dream about and serve and support the people who are waiting for you, these are two separate elements that need to be handled individually and then learned how to be brought together. That's everything. Thank you for that.
Yeah, the more that we've been dissecting it and talking about it, the more that so many of these elements have become clear in our understanding and therefore our teaching of it. But it doesn't matter if it's clear to us. We want to know if it's clear to you. So please let us know what's landing. And if you have any questions, if there's anything that's not making sense, because what we're talking about is not generally dissected and taught. Nobody ever taught it to me. No. So we're generally not taught how to relearn and unlock our creativity. We're just taught that we need to be creative. We need to do videos. We need to write poems. We need to sing songs. We need to whatever, but we don't understand how that process, how it was taken from us and then how to regain it. So It's not good enough to just know what to do. You have to know how to do it. And the how in unlocking the creativity with so many of these concepts, it's extremely simple. It's just hard. And we'll explain what that means in a moment. First of all, this morning I realized, like, what's some of the required ingredients of the creative process.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just going to give you 3 of them at a very high level. Your creativity needs TLC, but not the TLC that you might be familiar with, not the tender loving care, and not the 90s group.
That's them,
Right.
right?
Would you say they're hip hop? I was going to say hip hop, but then it didn't feel like hip hop.
I don't think
Maybe
so.
R&B ish.
Yeah, R&B.
Okay, we'll call them R&B. So not that group. This kind of TLC for creativity is tension, leverage, and conflict.
Mm.
There must be tension in order to create anything new, because there's always going to be conflict between the old and the new, the desire to create and the desire to stay safe.
That's right.
You will never be able to turn off your desire to stay safe. What that means is every time you go into new territory, you will have tension that at the very least reminds you that you're going into new territory. You might get to the point where it doesn't scare you anymore and the intensity might lower, but you'll always have tension. Leverage is you got to have a reason to do this.
Yeah.
And then conflict, I just mentioned, and we've been talking about. So TLC, tension, leverage, and conflict. Those are 3 of the most important elements of creativity, but we've been programmed to avoid all of them.
Right.
So that's why we don't do it, because it's not familiar to us. It's been programmed out of us. I'm going to dive into the idea of familiar probably in a different class. I want to talk about it now, but I don't think I have the time to talk about it at the level that I want to. So we'll do it at a different time. Like really dissecting and why we're so addicted to familiarity. We really, truly are. So creativity just it inherently is the unknown. You can't create something that already exists. I created something familiar. Nobody's ever said that, because there's no such thing as creating something that already exists, when creativity is building something that doesn't exist. So right. Our familiarity is found in what already exists. Our creativity inherently is designing, building something that doesn't exist. So your relationship to familiarity is one of those constant challenges that you're going to have. So here's the how process. I'm going to give you 4 or 5. We'll see how it comes out of me. 4 or 5 steps to create. These are pretty much in chronological order, although not always all the time. The first one is to produce. You got to produce something. You got to create something that didn't exist. Produce. Step number 2 is publish. Put it out there. Now I want to pause here. All of your fears, at least the way that you're holding on to them, will be because of publishing something. Think about the reasons that you might resist creating and putting yourself out there. It's because you don't want to, you don't want people to not like it. You don't want the feedback. You don't want your parents or somebody that you know to say something about it. You don't want it to suck, basically. Right. But you don't want it to suck externally. You don't want other people to not like what you have, right? But that requires them to know about it. Here's the cool thing. You can produce stuff and not let anybody know about it.
Right.
So most people don't produce because they're afraid of publishing.
Just sad.
But the fear of publishing is not an excuse to not produce. And what I'll tell you is this. The majority of the muscles that you need to build are in the producing stage in the beginning. So let me make this really clear. The majority of the muscles you need to build in the beginning to unlock your creativity is the producing. The majority of your fears is in the publishing. Your brain convinces you that because you should be afraid of the publishing, you shouldn't produce. And it makes a hell of a lot of sense, because you know what they can't judge? Something that was never produced. So if you don't produce it, they can't hate it. If you don't produce it, it can't suck. So then we go, okay, I will give myself permission to produce it as soon as I know they won't hate it and it won't suck.
Right.
Literally impossible. So the muscles that need to be built in the early phases are the producing muscles, and that's separate from the publishing muscles. Now, publishing is a whole nother thing. Super important also. But your relationship to publishing only matters is if you produce something.
Yeah.
Again, in our program, we're going to separate these two because it's important. They have distinct muscles.
Right.
Then steps 3 and 4 are process and process. So this is going to be 5 steps. Process and process, because process has 2 meanings. Process is process your relationship to the publishing of your work. And if you created something that's meaningful to you, chances are you will not like it.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get that out of the way, you guys. Because one of the biggest things that causes people to not produce or continue producing is they don't like what they produced. And Michelle and I are celebrating that. Awesome.
Yeah.
Because for you to like what you produced, it has to be fake. It has to be safe. It has to be the thing that's not going to produce any meaningful change anyway, because if it doesn't have the capacity for people to not like it, it doesn't have the capacity to change anybody's life. So the only thing that you will really like in the beginning phases, if you're like most humans, are the stuff that sucks anyway. Really sucks. Like it doesn't have any viability. It can't transform anybody. But understand, it's our intellect that is deciding whether we quote unquote like this or not. But it's deciding around whether it's safe or not. And anything that produces other people's disapproval isn't safe. That's more of a sign that your creativity is meaningful. If your intellect goes, I don't know about this, a lot of people aren't going to like it. That should be, yes, good. Because the more people that don't like it, the more people that need it. Now, this is a little bit off in the future, but you have to understand that this is the natural cycle for almost everybody, because when you don't like what you produce and or when you publish it, I want you to remember, Sean said I wouldn't. Oh, right. Maybe this is actually part of the process. Maybe I'm not the idiot, the only one that can't produce anything that he falls in love with, or she falls in love with, or we fall in love with. Maybe it's actually part of the process. And if you know it's part of the process and you're not the idiot, then maybe you'll keep going.
Keep producing. Yes.
The other step 4, which is the same word, process, is focus on the process. Focus on the process of producing. Focus on the process of creativity. And you've got to do it consistently. Everybody can do this. Step number 5, by the way, is repeat. Everybody can do this. Nearly everybody will choose not to. You don't need support in what I just gave you. I just gave you the information. You don't need support with the information.
Correct.
You need support with the implementation of this and the frustration that happens in the natural and the right way to unlock your creativity. So we're going to stop here. We're going to just finish up with some final thoughts. We're going to stop here from the content just for time. And there's so much more to say. But I really want you to understand this last piece. You don't need help and support in what to do. You need the help and support when you do it. Because by yourself, left on your own, if you're like most humans, you will not allow yourself to go through the required process of unlocking your creativity. If you don't allow yourself to go through the required process that everybody can do, but most people will choose not to unlock your creativity, you cannot be a transformational coach. This is what I've learned over 17 years. This is Michelle's journey. We've seen this with so many coaches. We see when and why and where and how people quit. People don't quit because they don't know what to do. People quit because when they do what they know, it's not comfortable and they don't have the support or enough reason to keep going. That's your whole challenge, you guys. 95% of the support that you need is going to be helping you process the uncomfortable implementation of the required steps. Now, if you like this video, check out that video right there, which is a live, unscripted coaching demo helping somebody with her money beliefs. Oh, so juicy.
It's probably likely that the prices will go up a little bit, right?
They will.
Okay. Yeah. Does that have to be any different, you think, with your coaching business?
It's not.
Cool.